Why do we do what we do? Why do we do what we do?
Hi, welcome back everybody to How to Become a Radio Program Director. We're right in the middle of lockdown number 2 of COVID. That's always a good thing, and I didn't get a haircut, so you're probably going to see me with hair unless this thing ends pretty soon. Anyway, today we're going to really move directly into programming a radio station in specifically formatics, but I'm going to do it in a couple different ways. First, ultimately the goal is to teach you the analog way, in other words, paper and pencil, no computers and stuff, what programming is about. And then later on in the course, we're going to move all of that piece by piece over onto the computer so that you get theory and then you get practicality of actually how to do it. And I have debated this a million times in my head how to do this, which is maybe why nobody's ever taught somebody how to be a PD before from scratch. That could be the reason. Anyway, what I decided to do is give you a little brief history of radio, but only as it pertains to programming. I'm not going to go into all the other stuff like Marconi and all of those things, but just basically programming. And then I'm going to move to a particular station where I learned programming. It was pretty much like getting a doctorate in programming. I learned more at this particular radio station. And the station is CKLW, and it was in the Detroit-Windsor market. It was actually a Canadian radio station. I crossed the border, moved into Canada, and was working there. And it was one of the top 3-4 radio stations in North America at the time. I mean, it was a monster radio station. And I'll explain that as we go through, as we kind of jump back into history and then bring it up to now. Prior to the mid-50s, early 50s, mid-50s, there really were not any formats on radio as you know it. All the stations were basically sort of block programmed, much like a television station or a television network. There'd be an hour of this, an hour of that, half hour of that, then the news would come on, a couple hours, public service shows, that kind of stuff. No one thing like you're used to now. And then in the 50s, a guy named Todd Storrs, who was in Omaha, he noticed that people in a diner or bar, wherever he was, that they would go over and play the jukebox. They'd put the nickel in, probably at the time, maybe it was a dime, I don't know. And they would play a song, but they would keep playing the same songs over and over again, the same small pack of songs. And that gave him an idea of, gee, why don't I just play the hits? Novel concept. But back then, nobody did that. So he started playing just the hits, and he got the current songs of the day, and he was playing them. Another guy picked up on that, a guy named Gordon McClendon, who was in Dallas, and ultimately ended up owning a ton of radio stations, really big monster radio stations later on. At the time when he started acquiring them, they weren't. But he copied what Storrs did and made it even more so, and made it even bigger, because he did a lot of contests and outrageous things, having jocks do their show up on billboards and handing away free money, downtown. When say a new morning guy is coming to town, the guy would maybe hand out $1,000 out on the street to just people passers-by. He sort of mandated, we're going to do 13 songs an hour, and one of the songs is going to be a brand new ad. That's one of them. 2 of them will be oldies. They'll be gold. And the rest of the songs, including that one new one, would be a current song. So he would do 11 currents, one of which was brand new, and 2 oldie songs, 2 gold. And the reason I guess he liked the gold was because he liked Glenn Miller, and he wanted to hear songs like that in the midst of, Elvis and the hit music things. And that's the way it was for at least a decade. Then another guy came along, a guy named Bill Drake. He was a PD in Atlanta, and then from Atlanta he went to San Francisco at KYA, and then he got hired in Fresno, and he met a guy named Chanault, who was the manager there. Drake ended up being the programmer, Chanault ended up being the business guy, and they formed this consultancy called Drake Chanault. Their first client that they had was a station in San Diego called KGB. Terrible radio station, and he turned it around in like a blink of an eye. He would take a bad station and turn it around and make it a #1 radio station. Just so happens that the owner of the San Diego radio station that hires him, he's on the board of directors of RKO General. RKO General at the time is this big conglomerate. They own General Tire, they own RKO Pictures, they own a ton of television stations, a bunch of, including ones in LA and other places, New York City, and radio stations. RKO decides to hire Drake Chanault for all of their radio stations, all their music radio stations, and because they're all doing poorly. So they take them over, and their first one that they set up is in LA. It's KHJ. And Drake forms a programming group of people who are, Ron Jacobs and a few other people who are extremely good. And this becomes the brain trust of the Drake Chanault programming consultancy. If you went and saw the latest Quentin Tarantino movie, it was playing almost continuously in the background of the entire movie, jocks and all, from back in that era. You would have an inkling of what KHJ was. It was called Boss Radio, but most people in radio called it a Drake station. And generally the Drake stations had very short jingles. The other stations had long jingles. The Drake jocks would talk mainly over the intros of songs. So if you had a 10-second intro, you talk 10 seconds. If you had a 15-second intro, you talk 15 seconds. 4 seconds, you talk 4 seconds. If it was cold start, then you wouldn't talk at all necessarily. You'd probably play a jingle into the song. Where on the other radio stations, they would just blah, 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 blah. And they would talk forever sometimes. And they go off on these 5-minute rants about stupid stuff. And these guys were stars on the radio that were doing that. But when these new Drake radio stations showed up, they were gone. It was like, good night, turn the lights out. You're over with. And the reason I'm telling you all this, because you might be like, why are you giving me the history lesson, is because today, right now in 2020, easily 90% of what's done on radio stations today are exactly what Bill Drake, the Drake guy in the Drake Chanault organization, the programmer, what he came up with and devised and told the jocks and the stations to do. And this was mid-60s. Nothing has changed in 60 years, which is either pretty scary, and you're like, wow, nice industry, you don't have to change it in 60 years, or that Drake was so much of a genius that he sort of figured out radio, the epitome of what radio programming needed to be, and did it 60 years ago. I mean, I choose to believe that. If you're doing a music radio station with jocks on the air, it's not all that much different that you can do. But he figured it out back then, in 1962. The other reason I'm telling you all this is that I was the last person to get hired at that Detroit Windsor radio station by the Drake Chanault organization. Actually, I got hired twice by them as a jock. One was in Detroit, and then 2 years later, they asked me to move to their station in New York City, WOR-FM, which was at that time the most listened to FM radio station in the United States. It was in a heated, head-to-head battle with WABC, which was an iconic, wonderful radio station with amazing jocks and stuff. And ORFM, that was the way everybody referred to it, ORFM, not WORFM. ORFM was going head-to-head with them. And I'll go into it, maybe some other episodes. I don't like to dwell on the past, but I need to do the past to do this lesson for you. But it was kind of cool for me because I had grown up listening to WABC, and then here I am competing with it. Years later, it was kind of wild in a way. When I got to CKLW, I had never seen a format before, a formatics of a format. There were formats, and I had worked at some pretty big stations along the way. I had worked in Albany, Schenectady, Detroit, 1.5 million people. I had worked in Hartford, and they were like top 40 radio stations. That was sort of the format. But when you went into the control room to actually do a show, there was no formatics. It was essentially, there's the records. Actually, we didn't, most of them didn't even play records. They were cards. Actually, they look like this. Things were on cart machines. And here's the music, there's the jingles, here's a log that tells you when the commercials play, you're on your own. Do what you want. And it was that way at every radio station that I had worked at until I got to CKLW, and then I'm hit with the Drake format that I loved, and I could emulate. I could actually imitate it, but I didn't know what I was imitating. And as a matter of fact, that's how I got the job. Because when I mailed an audition tape into the radio station, I got a call back and go, wow, you sound great. You're doing exactly what we do. And so for them, it was an easy transition to hire me. They could clearly see there would be no teaching, except that there was teaching because I didn't know how to do the formatics. I only knew how to sound like they sounded, doing what I thought were what they were doing, but it had nothing to do with what they were doing. And to this day, even the ones that I have programmed, and I've programmed a lot of radio stations, I have never seen, nor actually done, nor heard any radio station that was more formatted, more mechanical, more locked down for every possible thing that you could think of than CKLW in Windsor, Detroit. Even including when I got to ORFM, another Drake station, in New York City, it was maybe 3/4 as battened down as the one in Detroit. And I'll go through that with you as we get into other pieces of the course. But just know this, that even within a format that's done by the same consulting firm, they can be different. And musically they were different because the one in Detroit was very much more urban sounding. It had a lot more R&B songs because it was in Detroit, and then the one in New York City had a lot of oldies and doo-wop and stuff like that. It leaned that way. So musically they were a little bit different, but even internally also very much different. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the CKLW format as I got there, as it was described to me, walking into it cold, and within about 5 minutes, I was terrified because I'm going, how am I ever going to remember all this while I'm on the air, while I'm choosing songs, and the songs are only 2.5 to 3 minutes long because that's what they were back in that time. A long song was like 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Now that's a short song, but back then it was like song, 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 while you had to remember all the pieces of this format, which was brutal. It really was, and do a good show. So you got to do all those things at once. So I think the best way that I can teach you everything about programming is to start here. I'm going to throw at the entire exact CKLW format the way it was when it was this monster radio station when I got there in 1970. So if you're a fan of CKLW, you're a fan of radio, you're going to see something now that no one would have ever told you. I'm going to give you the exact format in every single detail of what that was. And you'll be amazed. And if you're a programmer now, you'll look and you go like, wow, I thought I do programming. These old guys, well, they were young at the time, but these guys got it going on. Okay, I'm getting the cut side here because we're pushing 15 minutes. I'm looking at the timer now. I got at least 10 more minutes to go here for sure. So I don't want to do a 25-minute lesson. So in a way, this is probably a great place to stop because we'll start in immediately with the formatics, and I'll take you through the station formatics at CKLW when I got there, and you will learn exactly how I learned, which was, in terror. Truly in terror. If I don't pick this up, my career is gone immediately. So where are we now? We're at the subscribe part? Yeah, okay, yeah. You know the drill. Just down here somewhere, subscribe button. You get the stuff from YouTube. You've seen it a million times. Everybody does it. Quite frankly, I'm actually getting tired of doing it. And if you like the course, for sure subscribe. And the next one coming up will be lesson 5, when we'll get right into the formatics piece by piece. Hope you enjoy it. Hope you're getting something out of the course. See you on the next one. See ya.